to go ahead and introduce today's presenter, Mr. Ben Schmerler. He's VP Solutions Director of Strategic Operations. Ben, take it away.
Yes, thank you so much, Jill, and thanks, Doug, also for joining us. As you might imagine, I think from all of you who've been on our webinars before, you realize that I have an extensive background in IT risk management, security management, compliance management. But at the same time, as you might imagine, I'm not a insurance guy in the traditional sense. I don't know the backwards and forwards of what goes into an insurance policy and things like that. So we'll talk about it a little bit, but I wanted to bring Doug in, who has a wealth of experience, especially on the cyber side. So I'm going to move forward in the slide deck, give you a little introduction here. So a true cyber risk management plan really doesn't matter what organization you're in, incorporates both preventative and reactive measures. So we should be putting things in place preventatively that address things that could potentially cause us downtime, outages, data breaches, compliance issues, so on and so forth. But then we also have to realize that we can really plan as well as we would like and be super proactive and engaged, but we still need reactive things, which is why we have things like data backups. It's why we have things like managed detection and response. It's why we have antivirus software, et cetera. We can do a really good job proactively planning this stuff, but nothing really is going to be a panacea on either end. It also acknowledges the notion that nothing is risk-free, right? We always need to be diligent in our planning so our risk level is in line with our tolerance. It doesn't matter how many controls we put in place, how many policies we implement, how many tools we buy, how much training we do, there's always going to be a risk. And so our plan has to acknowledge that and say, well, how do we deal with the risk and how do we deal with the consequences of any kinds of actual incidents? So some risk mitigators include, and just speaking very generally, technology tools, as I said, the data backups, firewalls, antivirus, configuration management, processes like how we train our employees, how we onboard people, how we share information with people. This aligns with our policies in mind, which express what it is to our organization, what data do we care about, how do we operate, what are our missions, how do we handle disasters, how do we handle incidents, what do we do to deal with this stuff, and of course training. How do we make ourselves sharp? How do we make sure that our staff is aware of the security threats that are out there? How do we make sure that people are aware of how to report incidents? How are we making sure that if we have technical people on our team, how do we make sure that they're sharp enough to be able to deal with cyber threats? And cyber insurance is a really strong tool to help manage technology risk. So a lot of it is on the reactive end, but the proactive side of cyber insurance is making sure that before you actually engage in this product and start utilizing it, that you've picked the right solution, that the cyber insurance you use is in line with what your risks are, that you're doing the applications properly, so on and so forth. So the key question, I think, for this webinar is how should an organization approach cyber insurance so that it meets their specific needs? What kind of insurance do you need? How do we approach getting cyber insurance? What is important on our coverage? What isn't? How do we communicate with cyber insurance carriers so they make sure they understand where we're coming from as an organization, what we're doing already, and what we maybe need to do in the future so that they're willing to cover us, things like that. So the agenda that we created for this is first talk about a few things. So I'm going to talk for a little bit, but then I'm going to hand it over to Doug when we get into some of the insurance stuff. But I'm going to talk about establishing a baseline technology standard and an evaluation process. And what we want to really do is limit your chances of actually having a security incident that maybe requires cyber insurance or any kind of issue. We're talking about cyber insurance right now, but we want to avoid all of the consequences of an incident, such as, just the downtime associated with it, even if we don't have to put in an insurance claim. The data breach that maybe doesn't incorporate a claim, but then has exposure to our business, things like that. How we can limit financial exposure and buying insurance. We want to prepare for the insurance marketplace. How do we go into it? And the ins and outs of cyber insurance, as well as Q&A. So standards. When we're creating a cyber risk plan, There are a few things to consider, and there is no right set of standards. It's not like I can go in and say, yep, here's your standards. We have things like the NIST 800-171 standard. We have the HIPAA compliance standards, PCI for the credit card industry. You have compliance organizations such as the SEC that focuses on fraud and things within securities and exchange, so on and so forth. But before you actually pick a standard, we have to actually ask a series of questions so that the standard we pick is aligned with this. And of course, we here at DPS can help you come up with a framework to work with if you haven't already established standards. But you have to ask questions first. So what do you actually need to protect and why? This is maybe the most important question. What in our policies do we define as sensitive data, and why is it sensitive? Is it are we in a medical practice and we're trying to protect patient data, case files in the case of a law firm, maybe financial records for a financial services firm? And why does it matter? Is it simply a matter of privacy and ethics? Is it a matter of government regulation, litigation, liability, what have you? We need to answer those questions. If we don't understand the consequence of a data breach or a system failure or something like that, we're not going to be able to establish a standard that matches that risk. Moving on, and I sort of alluded to this before, what are the consequences if that asset is lost or stolen? A lot of times, DPS, we have information that we consider sensitive, and if it was lost or stolen, we wouldn't have the government knocking on our door necessarily, but we might be embarrassed in public, as some trade secret, we have some plan or initiative that we're working on. We're not going to get fined if that gets out there, but it certainly wouldn't look good for us. On the other hand, you'll have data like HIPAA data, patient data, et cetera, that if that information gets out there, we have to report to the media, which is a huge embarrassment. We have to go through audits. We have to pay fines, so on and so forth. As you might imagine, the weight of those consequences will impact what controls we put in place to actually address those risks. Do you need to meet a legal or compliance standard? You may know this up front, or you may not know this up front. When you define the sensitive data that you're working with, you can find what kind of legal and compliance standard it has. Obviously, I'm not an attorney, but it would be important if you are concerned about meeting a legal standard or a compliance standard that you may need to get an attorney involved to make sure that you're within the law. My general advice is if you feel that you may be under a compliance standard that you need to address, just plan like you do need to be compliant. It's better to put a framework out there and be a little bit aggressive, a little bit over the top, and show that due diligence than not be in a place where we have no framework in place because we are sort of burying our heads in the sand, or we're too confused to come up with something. We have to at some point put a stake in the ground and say, this is where we think we're liable. How do you need to work in order to be productive regardless of standards? So again, we can throw all the compliance stuff out the window, or legal liabilities out the window. How does your team need to work? Well, I was talking with a prospect the other day, and these folks have a couple offices, and then they have people who work across the country. Well, I don't know everything about their back-end compliance or their liabilities and things like that, but what I do know as an IT professional is that I need to be able to give them the ability to sort of work anywhere, anytime, right? People flying across the country as well as these two base offices, we need to create agile solutions for them. We need to keep the uptime there. We need to be able to work with internet connections that may not be always super fast. When we are working out of a corporate office, oftentimes we can have very fast internet connections. But when people are working remotely, maybe that's not so easy if you're in a rural area or a part of the country that doesn't have the network infrastructure that a place like Baltimore might have. So how do you need to work in order to be productive? That's super important. We have to create the use case. And then what is your actual risk tolerance level? How willing are you to take a risk? I can put in disaster recovery solutions, backup solutions that can recover a server practically instantaneously. And that's really good, but as you might imagine, there's a cost associated with that. What's the trade-off between having a solution like that that's very agile in the event of a disaster versus something where we're going to be down for a day? Can we tolerate that risk? Some places might say yes. You know what? If the server goes down for a day, it's not great, but we can deal with that. Well, fine. That illustrates a risk tolerance that we need to put our design around and put our standards around. And then how do you ensure that you're meeting the standards that you have defined? So this is super important. We have to go back when all this is said and done and say, okay, we've established a standard. How do we make sure that we're not just saying, yes, we are a NIST 800-171 standard organization, or we're a HIPAA standard organization? It's not enough to do that. You have to go back and review what we're doing. When things change within a system or a business that has gone through a series of changes, we need to see, are we still using the right standard? Are we meeting that standard in the appropriate way? Are our controls actually working appropriately? Are perhaps some of our controls a little bit outdated, where we were using a solution before that was considered to be a really solid security solution, and now maybe because of the change of time, that standard's no good anymore. Great example of this would be authentication. I think we're, spoiler alert, I think we're going to be doing a webinar next month on password management, authentication management, stuff like that. Well, 5 to 10 years ago, the rules were really have frequent password resets, complexity, different passwords for every account, so on and so forth. So very rules that you guys have probably heard before. Now, I think those rules have all changed. PCI a couple of years ago said that, well, now good authentication for remote systems is having multi-factor authentication in place. Well, that's just a different kind of technology, and we're doing this because the seas have changed. And so there's a good chance that you're going to be, over the course of your system management plan, you're going to have to pivot as the risks pivot, as the standards pivot, as your goals pivot and your business pivot. So we have to keep all these things in mind, and keep in mind that all of these things, as we develop a standard, are a constant loop. We need to really be revisiting this, reevaluating this, and make sure that our plans are still appropriate. I wanted to pivot a little bit. I bet a lot of people on this call have looked at cyber insurance in the past, and you've seen checklists such as this. So you can see on this one, for example, it asks, what's your disaster recovery plan, and do you have a backup system? Do you have an incident response plan? Which of the following does the applicant currently have in place? Do you have patch management, multi-factor, remote access limited to VPN? I mean, an insurance carrier is looking at this to see how suitable you are for coverage, essentially, right? What are your how risky is your policy? If I don't check off any of those boxes, or check off all the boxes, or most likely somewhere in between, that's going to be a measure of my risk. If I have, for example, intrusion detection software in place, yes, I could still have an intrusion. Yes, I could still have a data breach or something like that, or a security incident, but those chances are much, much less. And then so on and so forth. So how do we think about this checklist? So again, each question is basically assessing a risk. If we're implementing these tools, if we're monitoring these tools, then we are lowering the risk both to the organization as well as the insurance carrier. These questions are based on a standard. If I took, in that previous slide, if I look at that application, those are pretty much based in a large part on the NIST cybersecurity standards that are out there. If you look at NIST, it's a lot of that stuff. You have a business continuity plan. You have multi-factor authentication in place. You have intrusion detection. Are you doing vulnerability tests? I mean, that's all they're doing. They're taking a framework, a standard, like I just defined, and putting it into an application to determine how risky are you, and are you meeting a standard? Are you doing your due diligence? Are we covering a responsible organization? You probably aren't doing everything on the list, and that's probably okay. It's super important that you're honest with these checklists, that you go through and you say them to the best of your, assess them to the best of your ability, because the worst thing that could happen is you have an incident, you attested to something that you weren't doing, and then there's some kind of claim issue or liability issue that they're not going to cover because you weren't honest on your application. It's kind of scary to me that I've seen people in the past who say, well, we're doing all this stuff, right? And they just check yes on everything. And I say, no, you're not. They probably don't want to do everything because of the costs associated with it. But we have to be honest about where we stand and see where maybe we need to improve or maybe we don't need to improve. Maybe our posture is correct, even though we're not doing absolutely everything on these checklists. You will also notice that it asks for technology, but it also asks for things like policies and training. So I always want to get back to this, which is that the people element of risk management is very, very important. And we're talking a lot about products and tools and things like that today, even in cyber insurance, which is a product and tool. But there's nothing more valuable than having an educated staff who is aware of the risks of what they're dealing with and is prepared to respond in a meaningful way, that they have good training, that they understand what the policies and procedures are. So if you're doing some of these technology things, but you're not doing those other soft things, I really encourage you to dig into that, because that stuff is going to really give you the best bang for your buck in terms of return of investment on risks. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Doug, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the actual insurance aspect, where he's obviously much more of an expert than I am, but I think it speaks to a lot of the stuff we got into before. So with that, I'm going to hand it off, and I'll disappear from the webcam, and I'll come back a little bit later.
Hey, thank you so much. Let me just get my screen set up.
We got a little switchover going on.
Yeah, I'll get this presentation. Okay, good. And then share my screen. So thank you, everybody, for joining. It's pretty rare that someone wants to listen to an insurance guy, so I'll go easy on you, but I really appreciate.
I think I need to make you the presenter, Doug. One second.
Yes. There you go.
All right. And then we want to disable my webcam again. I can just do this.
All right. Can everyone see me on the screen? Can you see me in the screen?
Yep, you're good to go.
I think you should be good.
Excellent, yep. Excellent. All right, so I'm here in Baltimore. I am the lead salesperson for cyber and technology errors and emissions on the East Coast here. But happy to have a Baltimore crowd here. I just want to go through basically cyber insurance 101. I'll be quick, and I want to leave a lot of room for question and answers, but I will hit the high points, the stuff that I hear the most feedback from when I'm out talking. So let's start with the basics. What is cyber insurance? The answer is right there. It's protection for anybody that uses technology. So what are you really getting in, or what's under the hood of cyber insurance? Because the word is thrown around a lot. You'll hear it in the marketplace, you hear it on the news, but what is actually inside of a good cyber policy? So the first thing is a security breach and notification and remediation expenses. So that's a lot of words. This is, the analogy here is if you guys had a flood, like a physical flood in your building, you'd call your insurance company and they would come in and recommend, like, hey, call this list of contractors to come in and fix it. We'll send an adjuster over. It's the same thing here. You think that you have a problem with your data. You don't have to know exactly what's going on. Usually people don't. They're scared. Our data is not working. Systems are not working. The data is missing. The data is stolen. Whatever it may be, you call your insurance carrier, and they'll send vendors who are very good at this, and they'll figure out what's going on, how much it's going to cost, and begin the process. That's the first thing you're getting. Another thing is crisis management. I saw the attendee list here and looked up your companies. I mean, basically, you guys have brands to protect. And if, the data is breached or you're extorted, I mean, it's all just bad for business. So we have another vendor, a PR firm, that would come in and protect your brand and the messaging and try to get ahead of the news and give you guys best practices in the event of a crisis. The next part, there's really two parts that are related. The general concept is called business interruptions. So if your data is gone, chances are you can't do your job. And that's expensive and painful. And we as an insurance carrier can make you whole depending on what happens. And I'll be happy to expand on that later in the presentation. Excuse me, I had a window in front here. There you go, extortion. So I have actually seen these are quite common. A lot of people think of extortion like murder in their own lives. Like that's something that happens to other people. I'll stay in safe areas, I'll do safe things. That's how I'm kind of staying away from extortion. Unfortunately, in cyber, although people have that mindset to protect their businesses from extortion and quite honestly themselves from being extorted through bad actors on the internet, it happens a lot. It happens here in Baltimore. It happens on York Road. It happens in Timonium. I mean, it gets very close to home. And we have a very good response. We have, again, another vendor that will come in. They'll determine who's extorting you. What is the best process depending on what we know about them? Are they demanding Bitcoin? We'll pay in Bitcoin. Should we even pay them in the first place? These are all decisions the vendor, who's an expert in the space, will help make with you. It's very interesting stuff. The next part, we have, it's kind of the final step of this section. There'll be 2 more or 3 more bubbles I want to talk about, but this kind of brings it home, is that once the dust is settled, so once all those things I just described are in the past, what are we going to do as a carrier to make you whole? To, let's say you lost a server. There's a type of hacking out there called bricking, where a bad actor will render your server or device into a literal brick. It won't work anymore. If you got bricked, well, now your server that happened to be purchased in 2002 is done. It's gone. You know, we're going to not go on eBay and buy that same server. We're going to buy you one from 2019. We'll actually make it better. And that helps everyone. It helps us as the insurance carrier because you'll be less risky. It helps you because you have a new server and a new appreciation for cyber insurance and protocol. Maybe you'll give Ben a call.
Please don't buy used servers on eBay, pro tip.
What'd you say, Ben?
I said, please don't buy servers on eBay, pro tip.
Yeah, don't do that. The last bullets are fraud-based. So it's not too hard to imagine the fraud that could happen. Someone stealing, and the reason I'm kind of putting them in a separate bucket is we're talking about theft of both data and money. So that's where it gets a little interesting here. So if someone's intercepting your invoices, which unfortunately is the trend these days, it's one of the highest targets of fraud. Even if you're using ironclad vendors like PayPal, et cetera, we're all still vulnerable. You can get brought into very nasty lawsuits over it. And there's coverage for it. So I'm going to expand on these. But I guess we'll take questions at the end. So if you have some questions on these, please jot them down and please ask me at the end of the presentation. We have some optional coverages. I won't touch on those because it is going into a rabbit hole a bit, but there just kind of shows that we have a lot more to talk about than these overarching topics. So what are you actually buying? I love to talk to people in plain terms. I personally don't like staring at insurance contracts and dealing with lawyers. I want someone to tell it to me straight. So the first thing is vendors. So Ben and DP Solutions is a great start. We, as an insurance carrier, are not always working with great companies like DP Solution, and Ben. We are dealing with someone who's just buying insurance. So we provide pre-loss vendors. They're not going to go nearly into depth as much as Ben's company, DP Solutions, will. But there are some stress tests and things we can do. But really where we help is post-breach. So imagine a scenario where it's Christmas Eve. Your employee, your coworker calls you. The data is gone. Worst case scenario, don't know what happened. Very scared. Sorry to bother you at Christmas, but this is so important. That's literally in that moment, you will call 1-800-TRAVELERS. We have another number, but it's a placeholder. But you'll call us, and we'll get you in touch with a vendor ASAP. We're 365, 24/7, and they will come in and begin the process I showed you on the slide before. So you're buying vendors. You want to make sure you're with a carrier with good vendors. You're buying lawyers. So there's an expression that I like to use that it's expensive when you're wrong. We all know that. But unfortunately, in the United States of America, it's also expensive when you're right. So you want So even if you don't make mistakes in your company, and no one thinks that they make mistakes in their company, and I'm not saying any of you will, but people will certainly allege that you did, and you need lawyers to back you up. And while you're at it, you might as well have great lawyers that you got for an incredible discount of the premium you're paying for your insurance that comes along with our policies. And then the last concept is the ins and outs, the contract language, and I'm going to touch on those right now. But just remember, vendors and lawyers. So here's the coverage concepts. Let's talk about these. So I'm going to go into depth about these. So first one, business interruption. So I'm going to describe it, and I'll try to give an example of something I've seen out there. Hopefully that hits it home for you. So contingent business interruption. This is one of my favorites and most important. That's why I put it first. So I was talking to a insured, so a customer out there that is in the theater space. So, and they're not like a Broadway production. They are starving artists. Let's keep it at that. So they're just barely making it financially. And they rely on Ticketmaster and Eventbrite to collect their money for their events. And if any of you know anything about event planning, they collect most of their money 2 weeks before the event. So if you think about your own ticket buying habits, what you're doing this weekend or next weekend, you're not really thinking usually too far out to buy those tickets. So they have a very tight time frame where they're collecting money. The question I had for them is, oh, and by the way, they gave me the litany of excuses for not buying cyber coverage. They said, well, you know, we've been in business forever. We're small, family owned and operated. We have great tech people. We do it all right. We don't make mistakes. Oh, and by the way, anytime we do interact with data or money, it's with these vendors like Eventbrite. So we'll just sue them if it goes sideways. So I just said, well, what would happen if Eventbrite went down during that 2-week period, or even like in the most critical moments, the days before the show? And their answer was they would be in a lot of trouble. I think they used some other language that's inappropriate, but they would be in a lot of trouble because they're not collecting that income. So there is a response for this. So think about your own businesses. I mean, all of us, I do, even Ben, ironically, has vendors that he's reliant upon to do business. In fact, this very this software for this webinar, you know, we're reliant upon it. If it goes down, there's no webinar. So, but we all have critical ones to our businesses. What happens if they go down? So this coverage extends to the policy to you guys for expenses for this vendor. So it could be Verizon, it could be Amazon Web Services, PayPal, Ticketmaster, etc. Whatever it is, if it goes down and they're disrupted, we'll cover it. And it's probably one of the most important things you need to know. So happy to take questions on that at the end. There's an example on a hypothetical company, so I'll read it to you. A distributed denial of service, a DDoS, or virus attack on your web hosting company or contract manufacturer takes your entire website down. So that's a good point. Your website goes down for 2 weeks, and now you can't collect money to ship and receive. So there is, and that was because of a virus attack on that entity. So there's coverage. Okay, I'm going on to the next example. And this one's, again, it's deserving of the number 2 slot. So social engineering. If you remember, I talked about fraud. A lot of people think that's like stick 'em up robbery, or kind of like Ocean's 11, where someone navigates into the inner workings of your financial system. But unfortunately, the easiest way to steal from you guys and from travelers and from BP Solutions is just to trick one of the employees. So you've probably heard these before, but just to hit home, CEO laying in bed and gets a phone call from the CFO, or email rather, from CFO, and it looks like there's a request for a lot of money. You know, he's sleeping, whatever, sends the money, and it's gone. And when I mean gone, it's gone, because that wasn't actually from his colleague. It was from a bad actor who had took control of the email system, or in some way, shape, or form presented themselves as the colleague, and he voluntarily sent out the money. There is insurance for this. So in insurance policy, you're not always going to get it with depending on the carrier you guys are working with, you're not always going to get it. You might have to ask for it by endorsement. The carrier may not even offer it at all. It is a pretty special coverage. And then these bullet points kind of hit home what I was saying. It adds first-party coverage, meaning coverage to you guys and protecting you from theft. That's what first-party coverage means. And it's the loss of your tangibles. So it could be money or securities. We keep it broad. It doesn't have to just be money. It could be, I had a claim, for example, where a liquor store was duped into sending $1 million of champagne. It was unbelievable, but they got tricked. It was crazy. And there's what is social engineering fraud. So it's the intentional misleading of an employee or executive officer using an instruction that purports them to be a vendor, client, et cetera, just to send them money. All right. Number 3, remediation. So very important. This is making you whole. You know, you can think of like flood and fire remediators out there. It's the same thing. You know, we remediate to figure out what is going on and then begin the process to make you whole again. So I'll just read some of the slides here. So coverage for unauthorized access to confidential information of others, including identity information owned, licensed, maintained, or stored by the named insured, aka you guys. Additionally, we'll cover fees, costs, and expenses to determine what happened, provide creditor monitoring, and provide a call center to handle inquiries. You can see the example to the right. Following the theft of sensitive customer data, your company incurs expenses for notifying customers and monitoring their credit. So I'm going to go into number 4 of 7. So I have 7 of these in case you're mentally pacing. Confidential business data breach coverage. So I'll get the information out here and then I'll talk about it. So this is coverage for unauthorized access or use of your data containing private or confidential information of others. It includes personally, it's not limited to, but it includes personally identifiable information. And it's for any organization that stores or has access to private or personal identity information. I feel like that's almost everybody. And there's your example. An organized criminal group hacks into your computer system, stealing that information, stealing that customer purchase history and financial records. There's insurance for that. I'm like the farmer's guy, even though I work for Travelers. I've seen it all. Crisis management service expenses coverage. So this is what I was talking about. You know, we hire a crisis management firm to manage your message, protect your brand. Very important. It really applies to businesses of all sizes. I argue that even the smallest businesses need it more because they're hanging by a thread financially. So a shot to the brand could be it for them, whereas a larger company could endure it a little bit better. So you definitely need a carrier offering you crisis management with a really good vendor. All right, number 6 of 7, extortion expenses. So this is the scary one that no one thinks is going to happen to them. Again, it happens all the time, unfortunately. It happens in small ways. You know, sometimes you get extorted for $100 and they're just testing you guys to see if you or your industry pays. It's unbelievably prevalent, and I talk about it daily, internally and externally. So what is it? It's reimbursement coverage for the extortion demand. So they look like this. You know, they threaten to sell or disclose your information by customers. They initiate an intentional attack on your computer or communications network. I talk about bricking. They'll render your server into a brick. They'll destroy the data, and makes other covered threats against you. So here's an example. Using a phishing attack technique, a hacker prevents access to your entire network. To unlock the system, the hacker demands a ransom payment in Bitcoin. And yes, we do pay in Bitcoin because that's the preferred currency of bad people. But it's also a very good currency. I'm a personal fan of it. But that's for another discussion. Last one. Security flaws or failure to update IT security. So some insurance carriers will not cover you it's a double negative. They'll only cover you if you are keeping to some almost unrealistic standard of updating your IT security. So in the event that you don't update it to a standard, good companies like mine will cover you. So just be careful of that when you're buying these. Make sure you're shopping different carriers and going to this level of say, hey, you know, what's the protocol around keeping this place up to date? Let's be realistic about it. And I'll read the last box. Your IT department fails to update important security software related to a new inventory management system, providing a loophole for the external party to steal sensitive business data. Well, in that case, you would hope your insurance carrier will cover you. Unfortunately, not all carriers will. So, Jill, did you want to take over and take it home?
Certainly. If you want to flip to the next slide.
Sure.
Talk about there you go, the cybersecurity breakfast. If you want to save the date, we're hosting with Travelers cybersecurity breakfast on October 31st. So happy Halloween. Join us at Bread and Circuses in Towson, Maryland. We'll have more information up, but you can also RSVP to marketing@dpsolutions.com. Doug, do you have anything else to say about the event?
Yeah, it'd be great. It's going to be mostly a networking event, but we'll definitely give you some great content like you've had today, and hopefully there'll be some like-minded business owners and people like yourselves in the room. It's going to be great.
Awesome. Right, now we can go ahead and open it up to Q&A. Yep, here's Ben and Doug's, oh, I think I misspelled Doug's name. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. But here's Ben and Doug's contact information.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a typo. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
there's an N at the end on the email, right?
No, you're missing the L. But, you know, it's too many STH last names, so that's our fault.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, so we do have a question that came in. The other coverage screen went by too fast. Do you handle E&O in addition to cyber for tech companies that do development for their clients?
My technology people, I'm very, very sorry for the oversight. Yes, absolutely. So if you're a technology company, I'm going to get the screen back to, I have to pop out real quick. So, oops. Get to the share mode here. There we go. So this is just the cyber piece of what I offer. So all these coverage sections. It has a hat on top of it if you're a tech company. So sorry to the folks who are not tech people, but you have an added layer of risk if you're providing technology services, and that's basically people suing you, alleging that you made a mistake that cost them money. So absolutely, we offer a very broad coverage section that covers all of your work and all of your services, and any error or omission alleged made against you, no caveats. So it's one of the best things that we offer, to be honest. Was that from Peregrine?
Michael Morency? Yes, Peregrine. Yep.
Excellent. Happy to talk to you if you had any questions about that, Michael. Or if you have a follow-up question, you can ask it now.
Awesome. Yep, we will put you in touch after this call. Thanks, Michael.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. And yeah, another question came in. If a breach occurs, do I have to report it?
Yes. So that's a great question. Go ahead. You want to go ahead, Ben?
No, why don't you start and then I'll chime in.
Sure. So from our point of view, think of it like a house fire and your homeowner's insurance, right? I'm pretty sure the insurance carrier would be mad at all of us if we didn't call the fire department upon knowing our house is on fire and we just watched it burn for a while. You'd probably get your claim denied because
I was going to just call and go out, you know.
Right. Your kerosene candle collection was the cause for the fire, but regardless, you know, in insurance, we want to see reasonable actions taken, and the most reasonable thing you can do here, because you don't know what's happening to your data. It's scary stuff. We don't expect you guys to be the fixers of it. So call us immediately. That way we can get best vendors on the planet in there to fix the problem. So that's the short of it. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're in a compliance-based industry, you know, HIPAA comes to mind. Legally, you must report it. And each standard's a little different in terms of reporting procedures, how long you have to report. I can tell you that many, certainly this is happening in the state of Maryland, but I know many other states, and of course, even the European Union in the case of GDPR, they are making it a legal requirement for you to report when you have a data breach. Not just that, I mean, I think there's an ethical and other considerations which says that you should report these things quickly. If you want to have best possible income, you want to show responsibility, get out in front of it, maintain your reputation, and you have a breach, you do want to get out in front and communicate on that. Best thing of all, of course, is to do the things you can do ahead of time, have the right policies, procedures, solutions in place, technology, et cetera, but we're never really having that conversation. I mean, I'm not saying that we can implement something that will eliminate the need or risk of the data breach, but I think you want to be at least in a position where you could go to sleep at night and not have to worry about that necessarily being your primary concern on a day-to-day basis because you haven't implemented the proper controls. But as far as reporting, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, hopefully that answers the question. All right, another question that came in is, what is excluded from coverage under cyber insurance?
Yeah, so it's pretty much, I mean, I would have to read you the whole legalese, but basically it's physical damage is probably the most easy to digest part of this. What'd you say?
I said we have 15 minutes. No, I'm
oh yeah, so yeah. Let me crack open the policy, but it's essentially we exclude everything that's like physical, so floods, fires, tornadoes, you know, all the stuff that you would get in your standard property and casualty, and then my company would give you a separate product at the same time. So when you are out buying insurance, you'll say, hey, this is what we do. You know, we're an IT firm, we're a florist, we're a used car dealership, and then the insurance agent you guys work for, they turn around, go to the carriers, get quotes for everything. And in that process, we, Travelers, would offer you a cyber product with the exclusion saying this product is specifically for data and all the things I explained in this presentation today. And then it stops at the physical stuff because you need to buy a separate product for that, which would be property casualty or workers' comp or umbrella or your auto. It's almost like me telling you that in your homeowner's insurance, we're not covering your cars because you have to buy auto insurance. So that's really the exclusions you see. But as far as like what's the catch or what sort of data stuff isn't covered, when you're dealing with a good company like Travelers, I would say nothing. We're covering all of it. You might pay $200 more for that privilege than the next carrier, but you have to be aware some carriers do play games. And they say like we're only a famous one is we're only you in this whole experience for glitches. And then they go on to define what a glitch is. Well, that seems pretty narrow. So that's something you have to sit down with your insurance agent and go over and say, you know, what are we actually being covered for, and can you flip to that exclusion section of the policy? I'd love to read it and see if it's more than just those physical things that we have in other parts of insurance.
A glitch is like a pretty, I mean, I suppose it has a definition. That's pretty broad. I mean, it's more of it's more slang than definition.
Yeah, they'll go on to define it, and you'd see like, oh wow, that's very narrow. It's just like the failure of one computer or something like that.
Yeah.
You don't want that. You want like literally our policy says we'll cover for all work, all services. Like there's nothing else to talk about. Everything you do, we're covering it.
All right. All right, we do have a couple more questions here. Does my professional liability policy include cyber coverage?
So if you are so the answer is no, you got to ask for it. If you have a good insurance agent that you work with, they would have teed this up for you. But that is a question for you and your agent. But as far as can we deliver? Yes, we deliver those side by side. My team's policy is to never offer one of those. It's always professional liability and cyber. And that's specific to you tech people out there. If you are not a tech company, you may not even have a professional exposure, depending on what you do. So you might only need cyber. But if you are a tech company out there listening to me right now, you very much do need that tech E&O, also known as professional hat on top of the cyber coverages.
Okay, hopefully that answers that question. And we do have one more. Our IT provider uses state-of-the-art protection, so why do we still need cyber liability?
Right. So going back to the example with the theater, right? They could have had the most, even though they're a theater company, they could have the most incredible server room and, state-of-the-art everything. But unfortunately, they were reliant upon a vendor, like Amazon Web Services for their website, for example, and that goes down. They're out of luck. They're not making money. They want to sue Amazon Web Services. Good luck suing Amazon while you don't have any money coming in. So you would need some other financial vehicle to prop you up, and that would be cyber insurance if you bought it.
Yeah, I actually have a couple things to add.
Yes, please.
First of all, if we consider actual attacks, ransomware attacks, brute force hacks, whatever, software vendors and hardware vendors issue patches that address the vulnerabilities, the known vulnerabilities that are used to create those attacks. And the truth is, we wouldn't be doing a bunch of patches every week. We have, Patch Tuesday, if you will, for our clients if we weren't discovering new vulnerabilities all the time. So patch management and these cyber solutions, even if you have a good provider, is only going to take you so far. There are unknown public vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities that vendors have not been able to address, holes that are going to exist. The other piece of this is that you can have a really good IT system in place, really good security technology in place, but there's still the people aspect, which is there's very little often that can be done if an individual with bad intent or ignorant intent goes and commits a data breach on their own or commits an event on their own that goes outside of the technology and the policies and procedures in place. And you can't go to the government or your customers or whoever who's holding you liable for this incident and say, well, Joe Smith was a real bad dude and he's gone now and I'm sorry and we're not liable. Well, that doesn't fly. There are a number of things, and this is why I say there's nothing that's risk-free. We can create all the procedures and policies in the world, but there are going to be risks. And it speaks to why we need to have cyber insurance in place, or at least have something that covers those kinds of risks. So I wanted to add that in. I think that's a really, really important thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Ben. That looks like it wraps up all the questions that we have right now. So, Ben or Doug, do you guys want to close things out?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and you can take it home, Ben.
Go ahead, you go first.
Sure. I really appreciate you guys listening, and if you have any questions, please get my contact information. I'm happy to work with you one-on-one.
Same deal. Really happy, Doug. Very happy to have you here. You definitely know much more. Look, you know about complicated things like insurance, so I can focus on simple things like cybersecurity. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, to attend. If there's anything you want to talk about with the content of this or anything else regarding cyber risk, etc., you can feel free to reach out to us. We really would like to have you all at the breakfast in October. We felt that a Halloween event would suit the terrorizing nature of cybersecurity. So we're going to do that. It'll be great. We really would love to have you. Feel free to reach out to us to register. We're going to have more details about the event shortly, as we finalize the agenda. But we think it'll be a really fun and productive event. As always, reach out to us if you need anything, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.